So we are back with Marge's story, the first part of chapter 4. So here we go. I lived in a small town in southwestern Kansas. By small, I mean a town that was 1,200 people in it, so really small. Of course, everybody knows everybody. This new guy came to town to live with his uncle, and there were stories about him, but he had a brand new Camaro. And he must have been 19, and he was like, wow, really, really exciting. His uncle owned a filling station, so he started working there. And I started hanging out at the station because I had it in mind that I was going to be the girl who got him. He was really cute. So I set out to see him. I set out to see if I could get him to pay attention to me. He asked me out, and then immediately my dad said, "No, this guy's too old for you. What are you doing? He's been out in life. You haven't." I said, "Well, I like him. And I have a really rebellious spirit anyway." So that's all my dad needed to say to set this all in motion. Don't you guys remember, I'm sure, you do exactly the opposite of what your parents say, those ages. Yeah, that's one of those. All right, so here we go. I was bound and determined to go out with him. I don't even remember when it was, but he decided that we should have sex. So I went to his apartment and we got undressed, got into the bed, and then I thought, oh my gosh, I can't do this. I said, no, I can't do this. But by then it was too late. He had sex with me. I don't say that we had sex because I was really just frozen. I had a lot of hickeys on my neck, and my dad and mom grounded me and told me I couldn't see him. I couldn't see anybody. I couldn't go anywhere without one of my sisters or brother with me. I had to have rides to school and rides home from school. I couldn't go anywhere. But being that person that I am, I figured out a way around that because I babysat a lot. After the kids would go to bed and after they would get to sleep, I'd just have him come over to wherever I was babysitting. Okay, first of all, I'm sure this was way back when, but this is a huge no-no as me, both as a parent as well as a former babysitter and nanny. I would, no, big no. It's like in the movies, right? But no. I continued this relationship with him. At this point, it wasn't about him, and it wasn't about love or anything. It was about showing my mom and dad that I was in control. I was going to be able to determine who I spent my time with and how I spent my time. Along the way, I got pregnant. I was 16, and I knew that if my parents found out, there would be big trouble. So I just ignored it, except that I was throwing up with morning sickness. We had to go outside every morning on the way to band, and I'd throw up on the playground. I was like, oh my God, what am I going to do? I'm pregnant. I didn't feel there was anybody I could tell or anybody to talk to but this guy. So I told him, and he started talking about it around town. And I mean, this was a small town, and news travels really fast. It wasn't long before the school counselor called my parents in and said, "There's a rumor going around that Marjorie is pregnant, and I don't know if it's true or not, but I think you should know." That same day, a couple of girls cornered me and said, "We hear you're pregnant." And I said, "How did you hear that?" "Well, your boyfriend is telling everybody. He's telling the whole town." I said, "He doesn't know what he's talking about." Then my mom came into my room after school and said, "The counselor called us in and said he'd heard a rumor that you're pregnant. Is it true? Have you had your period?" And I just broke down and started crying, and I said, "Yeah, I think I am." My mother understood. My mother had known my dad 6 weeks and had gotten pregnant, and they got married. She said, "I need to talk to Dad about it, and we'll decide what to do." Obviously, I could not have a voice in the decision. I couldn't make good decisions in their eyes. They decided that as soon as I started showing, I would need to go to this home for unwed mothers. in a city that was 250 miles away. It was weird because the purpose of sending me there was to hide it, but everybody in town already knew. You can't keep a secret like that in a town of 1,200, so I didn't get why I had to go away. The only sense I could make of it was that I had done something so awful and so wrong that I needed to be sent away. I was about 4 months pregnant. They loaded me up in the car and drove me on the longest drive of my whole life to this home for unwed mothers. I remember crying all the way, looking out the window and just crying, and still not understanding why I had to go away. I just didn't. They drove me out to this place. It was this old brick building that was 3 stories high, just what you envisioned as the stereotypical home for unwed mothers. We went in there, and all the social workers were so nice, and oh, this poor little girl got pregnant. We'll take care of her. There were a lot of 18, 19, 20-year-old women. They were sort of tough women, and then some of us really naive girls who had no idea what was happening. There were very few young girls, but there was one other girl who came the same week that I did. She and I bonded. We were pretty much in the same boat. We were about the same age, so we had a lot of talks and got really close. I stayed in that place for months. My parents would come once a week religiously. Every Sunday, they would take me out. We'd go to the park and take a walk or go buy a soda or something to eat, and then they dropped me back. Those visits were so painful. I mean, everybody just had to act like everything was okay and it's going to be over one of these days. My mother wrote me letters every single day that I was there. I'd get some mail every day when they did mail call. I've just blocked a lot of it out. I mean, it was okay if you have to live somewhere, but it was kind of like being in a prison. We couldn't really go out on the grounds. You couldn't go out of the place unless you had your parents with you. The older women could, but the younger ones couldn't. All these months confined to this place. This other girl and I started walking the stairs all the way up and all the way down. We thought if we exercised, the babies would come out faster. And at least this gave us something to do. We were bored. I mean, we all had to do the jobs. You'd have to be on the kitchen crew and cook the meals. You'd rotate jobs. Then we'd have groups on birth control. And we're like, a little late for that. I just hoped that my baby would come before school started so I could go back to school in September for my senior year and act like nothing had happened, just like my parents wanted me to. Just go on with life and have it all be over. I mean, my parents had decided that I would give the baby up for adoption, and there was never a door for talking about anything else. There was never any other option. I couldn't go back to school in September. I was still there. So that was really difficult, knowing that I was going to be back to school after it had already started. How was I going to deal with all the questions that I'd get? What would I say about where I'd been? I delivered at the end of October, and the very next morning, a social worker shows up. It must have been the same day because I delivered early in the morning, like 2 a.m. or something. The social worker comes in and says, "Here, sign this paper." She said, "You can have the choice. Do you want to see your baby before you sign the paper or not?" I said no. I chose not to because it was going to be too painful. I asked her what the paper was, and she said, "This signs him over to our adoptive parents. It says you'll never try to find him, and you'll give him his privacy." I hate that. So I signed it. I didn't feel like I had any choice. She said, "Okay, it's all done. Your parents will be here in a couple of days." I've dealt with this my entire life, trying to find any sense of power and voice, because this whole experience was just totally taken away in so many ways. I don't know what happened to my baby. I've always had to assume that he's okay. I got the message from the social worker that this was all done, and it's over, and there's nothing else to say about it. It was just a couple of days later, my parents came and picked me up, and we went out to eat. I was trying to eat, and I fainted, because it was way too early to be out doing anything. Then I went home, and I had to go back to school. My parents were like, this has ended. There's nothing else to say about it. Nobody in town has to know. I mean, everybody knew, but it was never, ever ever talked about. I just had this huge sense of shame, and I went back to school and acted like nothing was wrong. Nothing had happened. The spirit of the town was nobody ever said, "Where have you been?" or "Why are you coming back to school 2 months late?" But everybody knew. Friends that I had weren't my friends anymore. Then all the boys wanted to go out with me because, oh, yeah, she's had sex. She's loose. She's a tramp. She's a whore. I ended up in some weird situations. I mean, one guy had a gun and tried to make me have sex with him. I guess I had shown that I would have sex, so boys decided they would take advantage of me. I guess they thought I didn't have any sense. I was just waiting. I was just wanting to get my senior year over with. I did a lot of crying, but it was all private. I never talked about it with anybody. It was never mentioned in my family. And I just went on like nothing had happened. But deep down, I was feeling all of the shame and all the pain and loss and sadness. Really, really sad. But ignoring it all and just numbing. That's when I really learned to disassociate from my feelings and just go on about life and not feel. Oh, that's tough. We're going to be talking a lot about these feelings of postpartum and how adoptees feel, but birth mothers feel this too. Oh, now the next paragraph is going to be some tough stuff, so stay with me here. I went away to college and I started drinking. I found out that worked pretty good to numb the pain. I drank a lot in the first few years of college. I drank a lot and I had a lot of sex, trying to do something with all these feelings. None of it really worked, but I kept with the game plan. And all the time, I was wondering what happened to this baby. Just feeling this big, big sense of loss and crying a lot. I would get drunk and cry. In the dorm room, people would say, "Why are you so sad all the time?" I was finishing up my degree, and then I met the guy who's now my husband. Our early years were not good. He was messed up too. It took me a lot of years. I lived with the pain and loss, and it was never really expressed. A few years ago, I went to therapy, and this is what came out: giving up that baby. Along the way, I kept thinking, I'm really, really sad. I need to go to therapy. I didn't realize that's all it was about. That deep sense of pain. But when I sat down with the therapist and started talking, this was where I was stuck. I had just lived in that grief for 30-something years. It's still not talked about in my family, still not mentioned. If I bring it up, people say, "Oh, that was so long ago. Why are you talking about it now?" Or why are you thinking about it now? There have been a lot of times over the years when I've thought I need to find him and make sure he's okay. Every fall, every October, I get really, really sad. All right, I'm going to pause there for a moment. So first of all, there's a big notion from adoptive parents that birth parents are often alcoholics and drug addicts. And that's not true. Very few actually are. But we also have to remember that alcoholics and drug addicts, and again, this goes for adoptees too, right? Because we are at a higher rate for this, seek ways to numb the pain of the trauma, right? So that was her way of trying to numb the pain. And it's important to recognize those things. It's also important that the other family members of hers, her mother, her father, her siblings, recognize that there is a great loss in their family. They basically just cut off a limb of their tree and transplanted it somewhere else. I'm sure they're also feeling it without acknowledging it. But of course, she's gonna feel the most because that's her child. Also, October, again, trigger because it's his birthday. As an adoptee, I always wonder if my birth mother thinks of me in July when I was born, or if my birth father even, because that's a trigger for us as adoptees. So it makes sense that it could be a trigger for her. Anyway, we're going to continue on. I just felt wrong most of my life. I mean, I got a doctorate degree to try to make myself better, to try to prove to myself that I'm okay. And I still didn't feel okay. It's affected my self-confidence, my ability to be intimate with people and let myself be close to other people. I just couldn't have long-term friends or friends who were close because I was afraid they'd be taken away or that they'd leave and I'd feel all that pain again. I've lived most of my adult life disassociated from my feelings, just numb in order to exist. It's had a profound impact on my relationships with other people. Big time trust issues. I mean, that's one reason I couldn't get to therapy. I didn't think I could trust the therapist. Then living with the secret, that's another thing that kept me away from intimacy. I've had a secret. It's been a secret my entire life, and there have been very few people I've talked to about it. Having a child out of wedlock at that time was just not okay thing to do. You're not an okay person if you did that. And that's fueled my feelings of low self-esteem and low confidence. If I could have stayed home and had that baby and had it all been out in the open or just had a choice of whether or not I wanted to surrender this baby, I don't know what choice I would have made. I was living in my parents' house, didn't have a job, so it would take some cooperation on their part. But I've seen students of mine who've done that, and they've done okay. Things have worked out. So that is the end of Marge's story. It's extremely heartbreaking and problematic for several reasons, right? So the typical, as we've been hearing, is that the parents coerced it, the society, coerces it. We don't demonize the father, right? The whole, her view or how she's seen by people, especially by young men, is quite disgusting. But also from a social worker, and again, I know this is a time where they try to avoid the whole birth parents, and they just, they treated adopted children like it was a secret, not just, as being born by the birth mother and hiding her pregnancy and all that. But they often didn't tell the child that they were adopted, which causes a huge identity crisis, especially later in life. So they're treated as black sheep, and there's so much more to it, and it's so problematic. Anyway, we're gonna read about Yvonne's story next week, and then we are going to be entering chapter 5. So we are getting closer and closer to the next book, and I hope you guys are enjoying this. I will see you guys next Monday for Yvonne's story.